when a decorated war dog barked in a tense courtroom. Few paid attention, but when Keanu Reeves, standing as an unexpected witness, locked eyes with the German Shepherd, everything changed. What started as a legal battle for custody quickly spiraled into chaos as Blaze, the loyal dog, sensed danger no one else could see. In the next few moments, a shadowy figure would emerge, secrets would unravel, and lives would hang in the balance, all because of one extraordinary dog. The courtroom was suffocatingly silent, save for the rhythmic click of the judge's gavel as he called for order. Daniel Cross sat at the plaintiff's table, his weathered hands gripping the leash of Blaze, the German Shepherd sitting alert at his side. Dressed in his military uniform, Daniel's chest bore medals of valor, but his eyes revealed the exhaustion of a man fighting yet another battle, this time not on the battlefield, but in a courtroom. The opposing attorney's voice droned on, arguing the government's case. Blaze is a highly trained military asset, funded by taxpayers. As such, he remains government property and must be reassigned to active duty. The words hit Daniel like a blow, but his grip on Blaze's leash tightened. Blaze had saved his life, pulled him from the depths of despair, and now the system wanted to rip them apart. Then, the doors at the back of the courtroom opened with a soft creak, and a murmur rippled through the spectators. All eyes turned as Keanu Reeves entered, dressed sharply in black, his presence commanding yet unassuming. He strode down the aisle and took a seat beside Daniel, nodding to the judge. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Reeves, I was not informed you'd be testifying today." Keanu leaned forward, his voice steady and calm. "Your Honor, I believe my testimony can shed some light on why Blaze deserves to stay with Daniel Cross." The courtroom buzzed with whispers, the mere sight of Keanu Reeves injecting an air of intrigue into the proceedings. Daniel glanced at him, surprised but grateful. Blaze, ever vigilant, wagged his tail briefly before resuming his watchful stance. Before Keanu could take the stand, Blaze barked a sharp, commanding sound that shattered the courtroom's tense calm. Heads turned, but most dismissed it as the natural behavior of a dog in an unfamiliar environment. Most, except for Daniel and Keanu, who exchanged a look. "That's not normal," Daniel whispered, leaning toward Keanu. "He only barks like that when there's danger." Keanu's brow furrowed, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the room. Blaze's ears were pinned back, his gaze fixed on the double doors at the far end of the courtroom. A low growl rumbled from his chest, sending a ripple of unease through the air. The judge's gavel slammed down. "Mr. Cross, control your dog, or I'll have no choice but to remove him from the room." But Daniel shook his head. "Your Honor, Blaze isn't just barking for no reason. He's trained to detect threats. If he's reacting this way, we need to take it seriously." The murmurs in the room grew louder, uncertainty creeping into the faces of the spectators. Keanu stood, his voice cutting through the noise. "Your Honor, I've worked with enough service animals to know when they're trying to tell us something. Blaze isn't misbehaving. He's warning us." The judge hesitated, his gavel frozen mid-air. "Warning us about what?" Before anyone could answer, Blaze yanked the leash from Daniel's grasp and bolted toward the doors, barking ferociously. Gasps erupted as the bailiffs moved to intercept him. But Keanu raised a hand. "Let him go." Blaze skidded to a halt in front of the doors, his body rigid, his nose pointed at the crack where the doors met. The room fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. Then, with a sharp metallic clang, the doors burst open, and a shadowed figure stepped inside, dressed in dark clothing. The man paused at the threshold, his face obscured by a hood. His presence radiated menace, and his voice, low and cold, sliced through the room. "I'm here for the dog." Blaze's growl deepened, his teeth bared as he stood protectively in front of Daniel. Keanu took a step forward, his expression unreadable but his body tense. "Ready for action." The judge stammered. "This is highly irregular." But the man cut him off. You don't understand what that dog is capable of. He's not just a pet. He's the key to everything. Daniel's voice broke through the growing tension. Blaze isn't yours to take. He's my partner, my family. You'll have to go through me first. The stranger's lips curled into a smirk. I was hoping you'd say that. Keanu stepped closer to Daniel, his tone low but resolute. Stay behind me. And just like that, the courtroom turned from a battleground of words to one of action. Blaze crouched low, his muscles coiled like a spring. As the first signs of chaos began to unfold, Blaze stood his ground, his sharp bark slicing through the suffocating tension. The stranger, his hood obscuring most of his face, remained eerily still, his hands hidden in his coat pockets. Keanu Reeves, now standing shoulder to shoulder with Daniel, kept his focus locked on the intruder. The air seemed to crackle with anticipation, every second stretching into an eternity. Blaze isn't going anywhere, Keanu said, his voice calm yet unyielding, like steel wrapped in velvet. And I think you know better than to test us. The stranger tilted his head slightly, as if amused by the standoff. You don't understand what's at stake. That dog isn't just a war hero. He's the culmination of years of research, something far bigger than either of you. He took a deliberate step forward, and Blaze responded instantly, lunging with a ferocious growl that echoed off the courtroom walls. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and a few spectators instinctively backed away toward the exits. Daniel's voice rang out, cutting through the commotion. Blaze saved my life on the battlefield more times than I can count. He's not just a project or some tool. He's my partner, my family. Before anyone could respond, the man raised his hand slowly, revealing a small, metallic device. Step aside, he ordered, his voice low and menacing. The bailiffs hesitated, unsure of whether to act, but Keanu's sharp command stopped them in their tracks. Don't, Keanu said firmly, his eyes narrowing. He's bluffing, but the stranger smirked, pressing a button on the device. A faint, high-pitched beep resonated from the doors, and the atmosphere in the room shifted from tense to outright panic. Blaze barked furiously, his body coiled like a spring, ready to defend. Keanu stepped forward, his voice taking on a commanding tone. Everyone, stay calm. Head toward the exits quickly and quietly, he said, gesturing toward the far end of the courtroom. His calm demeanor cut through the rising chaos, anchoring the panicked crowd. Daniel wheeled closer to Blaze, his hand steady on the leash. What is it, boy? What are you sensing? Blaze let out a low growl, his eyes fixed on the device in the stranger's hand. Keanu moved closer to the man, his steps measured but purposeful. You've already lost, Keanu said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You don't walk into a room with Blaze and think you're the one in control. The stranger's smirk faltered for the first time. You have no idea what you're up against. Keanu raised an eyebrow. Try me. Suddenly, Blaze lunged toward the device, his powerful jaws snapping it out of the man's hand before he could react. The device clattered to the ground, its ominous beeping silenced. The stranger stumbled back, his mask of confidence slipping as the courtroom erupted in chaos. Keanu didn't hesitate. He shoved the man backward, sending him crashing into the bench. Before the bailiffs could move, Keanu had already restrained him, his movements swift and precise. The crowd erupted into cheers as Blaze stood victorious, his chest heaving but his stance unshaken. Keanu glanced back at Daniel, who was gripping his wheelchair tightly, his face a mixture of relief and awe. Good boy, Keanu said, crouching to meet Blaze's eyes. You really are something else. As the stranger was escorted out in cuffs, muttering threats under his breath, Keanu helped Daniel to his feet. The courtroom, though still buzzing with energy, began to settle. Daniel reached down, running a hand over Blaze's head. I owe you one, buddy, he said softly. Blaze wagged his tail, leaning into Daniel's touch. Before I share what happens next in this extraordinary story of loyalty and courage, I want to connect with all of you watching. Where are you tuning in from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever felt that unbreakable bond with an animal, hit that like button. This story isn't just about a dog. It's about the kind of love and loyalty that changes lives. Keanu turned to Daniel, his expression serious. This isn't over. Whoever sent him won't stop until they get what they want. Daniel nodded, his jaw tightening. Then they'll have to come through all of us. As Blaze stood between them, his eyes scanning the room, one thing was clear. This fight was far from finished. But together, they were unstoppable. Blaze, Daniel, and Keanu, an unbreakable team ready to face whatever came next. The sound of the courtroom's doors slamming shut echoed in Daniel's ears as he followed Keanu into the corridor. Blaze walked between them, his steps purposeful, ears perked, and nose twitching at every subtle shift in the air. The stranger's words still lingered, and the tension of the confrontation hadn't yet left their bodies. Keanu glanced back at Daniel, his jaw set. We need to get ahead of this. Whoever's pulling the strings won't just send one man. Blaze isn't just valuable to them, he's essential. Daniel nodded, his hand resting on Blaze's sturdy shoulder. I know, but where do we even start? That guy wasn't working alone. Keanu's sharp eyes scanned the hallway as they exited the building. First, we find a place to regroup. I have some resources that can help us figure out who we're dealing with. But we can't stay in one place for too long. They'll come looking. The three of them stepped into the crisp evening air, their shadows stretching long under the fading light. Car waited at the curb, and Keanu opened the door, motioning for Daniel and Blaze to get in. Blaze hesitated for a moment, his head turning back toward the courthouse, his body tense. Daniel knelt beside him, his voice low and reassuring. It's okay, boy. We're safe for now. Blaze relaxed, hopping into the car as Keanu started the engine. The drive was quiet, the hum of the tires on the pavement the only sound. Daniel's thoughts raced. Memories of the battlefield flashed in his mind. Blaze pulling him out of the wreckage, warning him of danger before it was too late, staying by his side when no one else could understand the weight he carried. He looked at the dog now, resting his head on Daniel's knee, and felt a surge of determination. They'd made it through worse. They'd make it through this. Keanu broke the silence. I have a contact, someone who's been tracking this kind of operation for years. They might know more about why Blaze is so important to them. Daniel leaned forward. You think this is tied to those experimental programs we heard about overseas? Enhanced training, maybe even genetic modifications? Keanu nodded. It's possible. Blaze might be the last link to something they don't want getting out. And if that's true, they'll stop at nothing to silence anyone standing in their way. The car pulled into a secluded warehouse tucked behind a row of abandoned buildings. Inside, the air smelled of dust and oil, the faint glow of overhead lights casting long shadows across the floor. Keanu led them to a makeshift workstation, a mix of computer monitors, maps, and scattered files. He tapped the keyboard, pulling up a series of images and documents. These are some of the names tied to covert military programs. Keanu explained, pointing to a file marked with redacted lines. But this one, he tapped on a name circled in red. This is the one we need to watch. Someone high up who has the resources and the motive to target Blaze. Daniel studied the screen, his fists clenching. So what's the plan? We can't just wait for them to come to us. Keanu's gaze was steady. No, we make the first move. Blaze is the key. But we need to use what we know to expose them. If we can prove what they're doing, they'll lose their leverage. Blaze suddenly lifted his head, his ears swiveling toward the warehouse entrance. A low growl rumbled from his throat, and Keanu's posture shifted immediately, his body tensing. Daniel grabbed Blaze's leash, his voice barely above a whisper. What is it, boy? Keanu moved to the side, his hand reaching for the concealed weapon at his hip. The The sound of footsteps echoed faintly from outside, growing closer with each passing second. The three of them exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. They were out of time. What was waiting on the other side of that door? Were they about to uncover the truth, or face an even greater threat? The footsteps outside grew louder, deliberate and heavy, as if whoever was approaching wanted them to know they were coming. Keanu moved toward the shadows of the warehouse, blending into the dim light like a seasoned ghost. Daniel crouched beside Blaze, his hand steady on the leash, his heart pounding in his chest. Blaze's body was coiled, ready to act at the slightest signal. The door creaked open, its hinges groaning against the silence. Two figures stepped inside, their silhouettes sharp against the dim light spilling in from outside. The taller of the two held a flashlight, its beam slicing through the darkness, while the other cradled something bulkier, a weapon. Daniel realized, his stomach twisting. Keanu emerged from the shadows like a phantom, his voice cutting through the tension. "Looking for something?" The taller man froze, the flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. "We don't want trouble," he said, though his tone betrayed the lie. His companion shifted, gripping his weapon tighter. "Funny," Keanu said coolly, stepping closer. "Because breaking into a place like this suggests otherwise." Daniel straightened, his voice steady as he called out, "Blaze, stay." The German shepherd obeyed instantly, his growls subsiding into a low rumble as he crouched, his sharp eyes tracking every movement. The second man finally spoke, his voice low and biting. "We're not here for you. Just give us the dog, and we'll leave." Simple as that. Keanu's lips curled into a dangerous smirk. "It's never that simple." The first man hesitated, his flashlight beam darting nervously between Keanu and Blaze. "You don't understand what's at stake," he stammered. "This isn't personal. That dog, he's part of something bigger. You're protecting the wrong side." Keanu's expression darkened, his voice cold and unwavering. "You want Blaze? You'll have to go through me. And I don't think you're ready for that." The second man raised his weapon, but before he could take aim, Blaze launched forward like a streak of lightning. His powerful body slammed into the man, knocking him to the ground as the weapon clattered to the floor. Keanu moved instantly, disarming the taller intruder with a swift, calculated motion that sent the flashlight spinning into the darkness. Daniel wheeled closer, his voice commanding, "Blaze, heel." The dog obeyed immediately, retreating to Daniel's side, his body tense and ready to strike again if needed. Keanu grabbed the man who had held the flashlight, pinning him against the wall. "Who sent you?" he demanded, his voice low and threatening. "And don't tell me you're just here for the dog." The man squirmed, his breath hitching. "You have no idea what you're protecting. That dog, he's the last piece of a program that could change everything. They won't stop until they have him." Keanu's grip tightened. "Who won't stop? Names. Now." The man hesitated, but the cold steel in Keanu's gaze broke his resolve. "Decker," he gasped. "General Decker. He's running everything, Blaze. The experiments. All of it." Keanu released him, letting him slump to the floor. His sharp eyes flicked to Daniel, who was already piecing the puzzle together. "Decker," Daniel murmured, the name heavy with recognition. "I served under him once. He's ruthless, but I didn't think he'd stoop to this." Keanu's jaw tightened. "Now we know who's behind this, but it also means they'll come harder. Decker doesn't play games." The man on the floor groaned, his face pale. "You don't get it," he muttered weakly. "You think you can stop him? He's not just after the dog. He's after the technology. Blaze is just the beginning." Blaze let out a low growl, his ears twitching. Keanu turned to Daniel, his voice firm. "We need to move. Now." Without hesitation, Daniel grabbed Blaze's leash, and the three of them slipped into the night. The air outside was cold and heavy, the kind that carried whispers of an incoming storm. Keanu led them to the car, his movements sharp and precise, his mind already working on their next step. As they sped away from the warehouse, Daniel glanced down at Blaze, who rested his head on his lap. His breathing steady but alert. Daniel's hand moved instinctively to scratch behind his ears. His voice soft. "You're incredible. You know that?" Keanu, focused on the road, spoke without looking back. "He's more than incredible. He's the reason we're still alive." The car disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind the echoes of what had just transpired. But as they drove farther from the warehouse and closer to safety, one thing was clear. The fight for Blaze wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The cold night air whipped through the cracked windows of the car as Keanu drove, his focus razor-sharp. The weight of the night's events hung heavy. But the three of them, Keanu, Daniel, and Blaze, knew they couldn't afford to stop. The stakes had just been raised. General Decker's name wasn't just a clue. It was a warning. Blaze lay stretched across the back seat, his ears twitching at every sound, his amber eyes scanning the darkness. Daniel turned to Keanu, his voice breaking the silence. "Decker's not going to let this go. He'll send more men, better equipped, more determined." Keanu nodded, his jaw tight. "We need to stay ahead of him. I've got a safe house a few miles out. It'll give us time to regroup and figure out our next move." As the car approached the outskirts of a desolate stretch of woods, Keanu took a sharp turn onto an unmarked dirt road. The headlights illuminated the dense trees, their shadows looming like silent sentinels. After several minutes, a small cabin emerged from the darkness, tucked away in the heart of the forest. Keanu killed the engine and motioned for Daniel to follow. The cabin was Spartan but secure, its reinforced walls and hidden location making it the perfect refuge. Keanu flipped a switch, bathing the room in dim light, and motioned for Daniel to settle in. Blaze sniffed the perimeter, his nose twitching as he assessed their surroundings. Satisfied, he returned to Daniel's side, his tail wagging faintly. Keanu walked to a table strewn with maps and a laptop. He pulled up files, scanning them quickly, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. "Decker's operation is bigger than we thought," he said, gesturing to a digital blueprint of a heavily guarded facility. "This is where it all started. A military lab focused on enhancing canine intelligence and sensory capabilities. Blaze wasn't just trained, he was engineered." Daniel's stomach churned. "You're saying they experimented on him?" "He's not." He stopped, struggling to find the words. Keanu looked up, his expression somber. "He's still Blaze, still your partner. But they made him into something they think they can control. And that's why they're hunting him." Blaze sat by Daniel's side, his gaze steady and unwavering. Daniel reached down, running a hand over the dog's sleek coat. "They don't understand. He's not just some experiment. He's more." Keanu nodded. "And that's exactly why we need to stop them." The sound of rustling leaves outside snapped their attention to the windows. Blaze's ears perked, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. Keanu moved swiftly, extinguishing the lights and motioning for Daniel to stay low. The cabin plunged into darkness, the only sound the faint rustle of the wind through the trees. Keanu moved to the window, his silhouette blending seamlessly with the shadows. He peered out, his eyes narrowing as he spotted faint glimmers of movement in the forest. "They found us," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Daniel tightened his grip on Blaze's leash. "How many?" Keanu exhaled slowly. "Too many to take head-on." Blaze, as if sensing the tension, crouched low, his body coiled and ready. Keanu motioned for Daniel to follow him to a trapdoor in the floor, concealed beneath an old rug. He pulled it open, revealing a narrow passage leading into the forest. "This leads to a hidden path. Stay low and follow it until you're clear of the woods." Daniel hesitated. "What about you?" Keanu's expression was resolute. "I'll buy you time. They won't expect the distraction." Blaze whined softly, his eyes darting between Daniel and Keanu. Daniel crouched beside him, his voice steady. "Stay with me, Blaze. We need to move." Keanu grabbed a flashlight and a small pack. His movements precise. Go. I'll catch up. Daniel nodded, gripping Blaze's leash tightly as they descended into the passage. The faint sound of boots crunching leaves grew louder above them, the pursuers closing in. Blaze moved silently at Daniel's side, his instincts guiding them through the narrow tunnel. As they emerged into the forest, Daniel glanced back toward the cabin. A sudden burst of gunfire shattered the stillness, followed by shouts and flashes of light. Keanu's silhouette was visible for a brief moment before disappearing into the chaos. Daniel clenched his jaw, forcing himself to focus. Come on, Blaze, he whispered, pushing forward into the darkness. The forest closed in around them, the shadows deep and endless. Blaze pressed close to Daniel, his presence a steady reminder that they weren't alone. Somewhere behind them, Keanu fought to hold the line, his determination as fierce as the bond that had brought them all together. The fight wasn't over, not yet. But for now, survival was all that mattered. Blaze, Daniel, and Keanu would regroup. And when they did, Decker wouldn't know what hit him. The night sky stretched endlessly above them, a blanket of darkness broken only by the faint glimmer of distant stars. Keanu, Daniel, and Blaze stopped near an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, their breaths visible in the cold night air. The weight of their mission hung heavily between them, unspoken but deeply felt. Keanu spread a map across a rickety table, pointing to the layout of Decker's research facility. This is the target, he said, his voice firm. We need undeniable proof, something that will blow this operation wide open. Daniel nodded, his eyes dropping to Blaze, who sat at his side, alert and ready. But once we go in, there's no turning back. If they catch us, they won't just come after Blaze, they'll come after all of us. Keanu locked eyes with him. That's exactly why we can't fail. Blaze isn't just another pawn in their game. If we don't stop them, more dogs and more lives will suffer. Blaze stood up, his gaze steady and resolute, as if he understood every word. Daniel knelt beside him, his hand resting on the dog's strong shoulders. You're more than they'll ever understand, he whispered. Blaze's ears flicked back momentarily, acknowledging Daniel's words before returning to his intense focus on the path ahead. Keanu glanced at his watch. We move now. The trio crept through the darkness, slipping past the perimeter of the heavily guarded research facility. Tall fences lined with razor wire surrounded the complex, and floodlights cut through the night, scanning the grounds. Keanu led them to an old drainage pipe, hidden beneath a thicket of overgrown bushes. He gestured for Blaze to go first, and the dog entered without hesitation, his powerful body moving soundlessly through the narrow tunnel. Daniel followed closely behind, his breath shallow but steady, while Keanu brought up the rear, his senses honed to detect any sign of pursuit. Inside, the facility was eerily quiet, illuminated by pale fluorescent lights. Blaze moved ahead, his nose twitching as he scanned for threats. They stopped near a steel door, its edges rusted from years of wear. Blaze froze, his body stiffening, and let out a low growl. Keanu exchanged a look with Daniel, then pulled a small device from his pack, attaching it to the door's keypad. Give me a minute, he murmured. Blaze's growl deepened, his eyes fixed on the door as if he could see through it. Daniel tightened his grip on the leash, whispering, Easy, boy, we've got this. With a soft click, the keypad flashed green, and the door slid open. What greeted them on the other side made Daniel's stomach churn. Rows of metal cages lined the walls, each containing a dog in various states of neglect. Some had patches of fur missing, others bore scars, and all of them had the same hollow, defeated look in their eyes. Blaze stepped inside, his movements slow and deliberate, as though he were trying to reassure the frightened animals. Daniel knelt by the nearest cage, his voice trembling. What have they done to you? His hand brushed against the cold steel, his heart breaking for the creatures inside. Keanu moved to a computer terminal in the corner, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he accessed the facility's records. "This isn't training," he said grimly. "It's torture. They're experimenting on them, trying to create the perfect weapon." Blaze stopped at the far end of the room, his attention drawn to a small, trembling figure in the last cage. It was a young dog, its thin frame barely able to stand. Blaze lowered his head, letting out a soft whine, and the dog responded with a hesitant wag of its tail. Daniel rushed over, his voice soft but determined. "We're not leaving anyone behind." He worked quickly to open the cage, lifting the dog gently into his arms. "You're coming with us," he whispered. Blaze stayed close, his presence calming the frightened pup. Suddenly, alarms blared, shattering the silence. Red lights flashed, bathing the room in an ominous glow. Keanu pulled a drive from the computer and shoved it into his pocket. "They know we're here. Move!" Blaze darted toward the door, his instincts guiding him through the chaos. Daniel followed, cradling the rescued dog as gunfire echoed in the distance. Keanu covered their escape, his movements precise as he deflected the first wave of pursuit. The trio emerged from the drainage tunnel just as a deafening explosion rocked the facility. Blaze turned back briefly, his body tensing as flames licked the night sky. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on his neck. "We did what we could. Let's go." They piled into the car, Keanu starting the engine without hesitation. The vehicle roared to life, speeding away from the burning facility. Daniel held the young dog close, its small body trembling against him. Blaze rested his head on Daniel's knee, his breathing heavy but steady. Keanu's voice broke the silence. "We've got the evidence. Now we expose them." Daniel looked down at Blaze, running a hand over his sleek coat. "We'll make sure this never happens again," he said softly. Blaze lifted his head, his eyes meeting Daniel's, as if offering his silent agreement. As the car disappeared into the darkness, their resolve was clear. The battle was far from over, but together, they were unstoppable. The compound loomed ahead like a dark fortress, its towering walls and the glow of searchlights slicing through the night. Keanu, Daniel, and Blaze crouched behind the ridge, their breaths visible in the frigid air. The plan was set, but the weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily on all of them. Keanu adjusted his binoculars, scanning the perimeter. Guards every 50 feet, cameras overlapping. "It's tight, but not impossible," he said, his voice steady. Daniel tightened his grip on Blaze's leash. "We've come too far to turn back now. Blaze is ready, and so am I." Blaze, sensing the tension, stood poised and alert. His sharp amber eyes scanned the compound, his ears swiveling to catch every faint sound. Keanu glanced at him, a faint smile breaking his usual composure. "He's more than ready. Let's move." The three of them slipped into the shadows, moving silently through the forest until they reached the western gate. Keanu handed Daniel a small device. "This'll knock out the cameras and sensors for 3 minutes. It's all we need to get inside." Daniel nodded, activating the device. The faint buzz followed, and the glow of the security lights dimmed. Blaze darted forward first, his sleek body blending with the darkness. Keanu and Daniel followed closely, their movements precise and practiced. Inside the compound, the tension thickened. Every corridor, every door felt like a trap waiting to spring. Blaze guided them through the maze-like facility, his instincts sharper than any map. They finally reached the control center, the heart of Decker's operation. The blue light from the monitors illuminated the room, casting eerie shadows. And there he was, General Decker, standing tall in the center of the room, his expression smug. Well, he said, his voice echoing. Daniel Cross and Keanu Reeves. And of course, the star of the show, Blaze. "You've caused me quite a bit of trouble." Keanu stepped forward, his voice calm but lethal. "Your operation is over, Decker. We've got the evidence, and we're taking it all down." Decker smirked. "You think you've won?" Blaze is just one piece of a much larger plan. Do you really think you can stop this? Blaze growled low, his stance rigid. Keanu's eyes flicked to Daniel. Get the files, he said quietly. I'll handle him. Daniel moved to the nearest console, inserting the drive and beginning the transfer. The progress bar ticked upward, but not fast enough. Decker's smirk widened. You should have stayed out of this. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the facility, the floor shaking beneath their feet. Blaze barked sharply, running to Keanu's side. Through the shattered windows, Daniel saw armed guards converging on the control center. Keanu grabbed Daniel's shoulder. The upload isn't finished. We have to hold them off. Before Daniel could respond, the door burst open, and chaos erupted. Bullets ricocheted off metal walls as guards stormed in. Blaze lunged into action, his powerful body a blur as he disarmed one guard and knocked another to the ground. Keanu moved with practiced precision, taking down attackers with swift, calculated strikes. Daniel ducked behind the console, protecting the drive as the transfer continued. But then it happened. A grenade skittered across the floor. His pin pulled. Time seemed to freeze as the device rolled toward Daniel and Keanu. Blaze, without hesitation, bolted forward. With incredible speed, he clamped his jaws around the grenade, carrying it toward the far end of the room. Blaze! No! Daniel's voice cracked with desperation. But it was too late. The grenade exploded just as Blaze leaped behind a row of heavy equipment. The force of the blast threw debris across the room. And for a moment, everything was chaos. Smoke filled the air, and the deafening sound left a ringing in their ears. Daniel scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding. Blaze! He shouted, his voice raw with fear. Keanu emerged from the smoke, coughing but unharmed, his eyes locked on Blaze, lying motionless amidst the wreckage. Without a word, Keanu rushed to the dog's side. Kneeling beside him, Blaze stirred weakly, his body battered but alive. His eyes opened slightly, and his tail thumped faintly against the ground. He's hurt, but he's breathing, Keanu said, his voice thick with relief. He carefully lifted Blaze into his arms, cradling him as though he were the most precious thing in the world. Daniel's throat tightened, tears threatening to spill as he reached for Blaze. You saved us, buddy. You always do. The guards, momentarily stunned by the explosion, regrouped and began advancing again. Keanu handed Blaze to Daniel. We're not done yet. Hold on to him. I'll clear the way. With an almost supernatural determination, Keanu charged toward the remaining guards, disarming and incapacitating them one by one. Daniel clutched Blaze tightly, his steps quick but careful as he followed Keanu through the chaos. The upload completed with seconds to spare, and Daniel grabbed the drive before they made their escape. They burst out of the facility just as another explosion rocked the compound. Blaze whimpered softly in Daniel's arms, his eyes half closed but still aware. Hang in there, Blaze, Daniel whispered. We're almost there. Keanu led them through the forest, his sharp instincts guiding them back to the safety of their vehicle. As they drove away, the compound erupted in flames behind them, the glow lighting up the night sky. Blaze lay in the back seat, his breathing shallow but steady. Daniel stroked his fur gently, his voice trembling. You're going to be okay. We'll take care of you. Keanu glanced at them through the rearview mirror, his jaw clenched. He's stronger than any of us. He'll pull through. The road stretched endlessly ahead, but for the first time, felt like a road toward freedom. Blaze had saved them, risking everything without hesitation. And now, it was their turn to fight for him. The morning sunlight streamed through the trees as Keanu's car pulled up to a small veterinary clinic nestled at the edge of a quiet town. The battle at Decker's compound felt like a distant memory, but the weight of the night's events hung heavy in the air. Blaze lay in the back seat, his breathing shallow but steady, his body wrapped in a blanket. Daniel sat beside him, his hand resting gently on Blaze's head. Keanu stepped out of the car, glancing around to ensure they weren't being followed. He opened the back door carefully. "Let's get him inside," he said, his voice calm but urgent. Daniel nodded, cradling Blaze in his arms as they entered the clinic. The receptionist, a kind-faced woman in her 40s, immediately called for the veterinarian. Within seconds, the team emerged, guiding Daniel to an examination room. "We'll take good care of him," one of them assured, their voice warm but professional. Daniel hesitated, his fingers brushing against Blaze's fur. "You have to," he said softly, his voice breaking. "He saved our lives." As Blaze was wheeled away, Daniel and Keanu were left in the waiting room, the ticking of a wall clock the only sound. Daniel sat with his head in his hands, exhaustion and worry etched into his features. Keanu placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "He's a fighter, Daniel. He's made it through worse." Daniel looked up, his eyes glistening. "But for how long? He keeps giving everything he has to protect us. What if one day it's too much?" Keanu's expression softened. "Blaze doesn't just fight because he's trained to. He fights because he loves you. That kind of bond isn't something you can break. It's something you honor." The door to the exam room opened, and the vet stepped out, wiping her hands on a towel. Daniel shot to his feet. "Is he?" "He's stable," the vet interrupted with a small smile. "The injuries are serious, but nothing we can't treat. With rest and care, he'll recover." Daniel's knees nearly buckled with relief. Keanu steadied him as the vet continued. "You're lucky. He's incredibly resilient. Whatever he's been through, it's made him stronger. Stronger than any of us," Daniel murmured, his voice heavy with gratitude. They were led into the recovery room, where Blaze lay on a soft bed, his body bandaged but his eyes open. The faint thump of his tail against the mattress was enough to bring a smile to Daniel's face. He knelt beside Blaze, his hand resting gently on the dog's chest. "Hey, buddy, we're here. You did it." Blaze's eyes softened, his gaze moving between Daniel and Keanu. For a moment, the room felt lighter, as though all the pain and fear had been replaced with quiet understanding. Scout, the small dog they'd rescued, padded into the room, his tiny frame dwarfed by Blaze's presence. He sniffed at Blaze cautiously before curling up beside him, offering his own kind of comfort. Keanu leaned against the doorway, watching the scene unfold. "Looks like you've got a team now," he said with a faint smile. Daniel chuckled, his voice tinged with emotion. "I couldn't ask for a better one." Later that evening, as Blaze rested peacefully, Daniel and Keanu sat outside the clinic on a weathered bench. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Keanu handed Daniel a small USB drive. "This has everything. The files, the footage, the names. It's already with the right people. But you should have it too." Daniel turned the drive over in his hand. "We did it, didn't we? Decker's done." Keanu nodded. "His operation is finished, and the program is shut down. The dogs that survived are being cared for, and Decker won't see the light of day for a long time." Daniel let out a deep breath, the weight of their mission finally lifting. "And Blaze?" Keanu's eyes softened. "He's free. No more running. No more fighting unless he wants to. He's yours, Daniel. He always has been." The two men sat in companionable silence, the enormity of their journey settling over them. Daniel finally spoke, his voice steady. "You saved us, Keanu. I don't know how to thank you." Keanu stood, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "You don't need to. Blaze is proof that loyalty and courage still matter in this world. That's enough for me." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, engraved tag and handing it to Daniel. On it were the words, "Courage, loyalty, forever." Daniel smiled, clutching the tag tightly. "Thank you." Keanu gave a small nod, then turned to leave. As he walked toward his car, Blaze's bark broke the silence. Keanu paused, looking back to see the dog watching him intently, his tail wagging softly. "Take care of him," Keanu called over his shoulder. "And take care of yourself." As the car disappeared into the distance, Daniel returned to Blaze's side, placing the tag on the table beside him. The clinic was quiet now. Scout curled up at Blaze's side, and the world finally felt at peace. For the first time in what felt like forever, Daniel allowed himself to believe in tomorrow. Blaze had fought for them, for freedom, for family, and now they could finally begin to heal, together. What an incredible journey we've just experienced with Keanu Reeves, Daniel, and Blaze. This story wasn't just about action and suspense. It was a heartfelt tribute to the unwavering loyalty of dogs, the unbreakable bond between humans and animals, and the courage it takes to stand up for what's right. Blaze's bravery and Keanu's relentless determination remind us that even in the darkest moments, loyalty and love can light the way. What did you think about this story? Comment 2 if you loved it and want to see more stories like this. Or comment 7 if it didn't resonate with you. We value your honest feedback. Please remember, this is a fictional story created to celebrate the courage of characters like Keanu Reeves and the incredible connection between humans and their loyal animal companions. Blaze symbolizes absolute loyalty and the sacrifices dogs make to protect those they love. If this story touched your heart or made you reflect on your own bond with an animal, please share it with your friends and family to spread the message of loyalty, courage, and love. And don't forget to subscribe to Tapestry of Worlds so you never miss another inspiring story. Together, let's create a world filled with tales that move, inspire, and connect us all.